Well, welcome everybody. You're tuned in to Brainstorming the Human Connection brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. Today, we're going to have another outstanding interview and conversation with someone who is, I can say, at the eye of the storm of one of the more important let's say controversies, not really controversy, but things that we have to work on in South Dakota, and that's education. And at the center of the problem with education is our ability to recruit and retain teachers. And today we're going to have someone who is at the center of that effort. It's Dr. David DeJong, and he is the Dean of the College of Education at Dakota State University, and he's going to tell us more about himself in just a moment. But I want to take this opportunity to remind all of you that this is a conversation. It's, of course, we do interviews, and David and I will be talking, but this works when you participate. This works when as you have questions, maybe jot them down, and we will sort of make a break for that. And if you have something that's said or you don't understand or you have a question about, feel free to raise your hand or something like that at any time to let us know that you have something to contribute to this conversation. That's what brainstorming is all about. No one of us will ever be as important or intelligent or knowledgeable as all of us together. So I'm hoping that you will add something to this conversation. With that, welcome, Dr. DeJong.
It's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Let's start off by talking a little bit about who you are so that those who are joining us can have some idea of what you're bringing to the table, both as a person and as a professional.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is David DeJong, and I'm currently the Dean of the College of Education at Dakota State University, and I've only been here for 6 months. So I'm pretty new to my role, but it's going really well, and I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. So how I got to this position, I was born and raised in a small town in Northwest Iowa, a Dutch community of just 2,000 people, and went to the public school, had a great experience, got my teaching degree, became a 3rd grade teacher, moved into be a 4th grade teacher. And then I became a principal superintendent at a young age, and I loved it. I kind of grew up as a leader through that. So I did that for 8 years. And then a job opened up at the University of South Dakota. So they took a chance on a young whippersnapper, and I loved that role for 7 years, where I got to know most of the principals and superintendents in South Dakota, because I was a part of the Division of Educational Leadership, and I led that division where we trained a lot of principals and superintendents. And now I'm the Dean of the College of Education. So one thing that I've learned in just my 6 months here is that the teacher shortage that we hear about on the news is deeper, more complex, and a bigger deal than even I imagined it to be. It's been startling, to be honest, in my 6 months. So I hope to share a little bit of what I've learned and what we're working on today.
Well, let's try to get a scope of the problem. Can you talk a little bit about South Dakota versus the nation? What are the teaching shortages or teacher shortage like? What's the scope of it? How deep is it?
Yeah, so the scope, all 50 states have can show a demonstrated teacher shortage. Okay, so yeah, we have that in South Dakota, where we have open positions right now, and so does every other state. And what that really looks like when I talk to my principal and superintendent friends, like this year, they'll say things like, if we had a third grade opening, we used to have 150 teaching applicants, and now we have 7. Or they'll say we have a high school special ed opening where we maybe had 30 candidates and we have 0 or 1. So when you're choosing from such a smaller pool than what we were just 3 or 5 or 10 years ago, that's a big deal. So the game has changed in just 3 short years. Now, other states, what they are doing, they're taking legislative action just to get warm bodies into teach into public schools. So for example, Florida and Arizona are oftentimes like the poster child of what's happening in those states. And you no longer need a teaching degree. So if you are like a military veteran, we will let you teach 3rd grade. So that's happening right now in other states. And we need to be aware that if we don't do something, about this, like that will come here. And we can all agree that we don't want something like that to happen to our schools. So that's actually a vast majority of the reason why I applied to this. I love looking at big, challenging goals and then sinking my teeth into it. So here I am.
Yeah. Well, I would say see your dentist, because you're gonna have a lot of tooth work to be done. Let's talk about the competition a little bit. You mentioned there are other schools around the country rather, that are facing very much similar problems, if not the same problem. So that suggests that we are competing either directly or indirectly with other school systems. Can you talk about the challenges that South Dakota faces in that competition?
Yeah, the biggest competition that's happening right now in the state is in rural districts that have teaching positions that are hard to fill. For example, a high school math teacher. Wow, like if you live in a rural district, not close to a population center, and you lose your high school math or physics or science teacher, or Spanish is another common one, or special education. Those are the areas that are brought up the most frequently. I talk to administrators that are panicky about what are they going to do next year to fill those positions. So what happens is that creates, a high demand for teachers. And just at Dakota State University, we will get calls from principals or superintendents right now, maybe 2 or 3 times a week for 52 weeks of the year, asking us who still needs jobs. Do you have anybody that's available? What can they teach? What's happening now is people will get creative on, somebody that's trained to teach in a different content area. They'll get alternative certification to teach in what that school district needs. So that's what it's looking like right now. That's why I'm saying, whoa, this is a big deal in the state.
Well, it occurs to me that you mentioned a word earlier, warm bodies, and I'm wondering what effect the warm body approach is having on the quality of education. I mean, we know what it's like to have the gym teacher have to fill in for history. Can't imagine what that's going to be like for math. I mean, that might explain why we have such weird history conversations these days. But what is that doing to the quality of education?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had different news, but anecdotally, it's decreasing the quality of what our students are receiving in our schools right now. The more teachers we have in our pipeline, the better, the more of an opportunity that a principal, when they're hiring a teacher, they have a quality pool to choose from, and they can find somebody that would be a good fit in their school district. Okay, so when your pool goes down to just like 0 or 1, one person to choose from, well, you give that up, right? You have, it's taken away from you your ability to have high quality teachers that are also a good fit in your school district.
It would seem to me that with the stress of that, you probably lose a few superintendents and principals as well.
Well, the tenure, the average tenure for principals and superintendents right now is about 3 to 5 years, depending on what study you look at.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenging job. The role of a school leader has also changed. There are more needs in our school district right now, more student needs than we've ever had in the history of education. So, people are doing their best genuinely, I believe. I know these principals, I know the superintendents, I know these teachers. They're doing their absolute best that they can right now. But there's a lot of people in education that are stretched thin. We have a tired and weary group of educators and educational leaders right now.
Right. Well, one of the things that strikes me is something actually has struck me after being here, being in South Dakota for a couple of years, is how similar the problems are to inner city schools that I grew up with. Like they had teacher shortages, and the result is you had like 30 or 40 kids in a class. And so with 30 or 40 kids in a class, many of whom came to school hungry or their parents are fighting and stuff like that, that's a tough job, to try to teach people who are struggling with that. And it just seems to me that we're rolling even closer to that. As the teacher shortage goes down, you're going to have necessarily more kids in a classroom. And how is that playing on the morale and the ability of the teachers actually to teach, even if they're a good teacher?
Yeah, great point. I mean, what it does is it impacts retention, right? So, if you've been a longtime teacher and now you have 30 students in your classroom, teachers are reporting that they're dealing with more behavioral issues, and they're asking us in higher education to provide more training and more professional development on how to meet the needs of students that struggle with behavioral issues. And then, when you compile that on, there's such a shortage that, there's 8 periods in a day. And if a teacher has 1 period a day to plan, what they are doing now is they're taking that 1 period and they're like, hey, we have a need for somebody to fill the music class during your 7th period. So now a teacher that's tired, normally like gets to plan for that next day or next week or collaborative team meetings. Sometimes that's being taken away, where teachers are now having to cover just to get by from a day to day. And that hurts retention when that type of culture and environment is facing us each day.
I have friends who are in the substitute teaching business, and most of them, the friends I have, they have no real formal education in teaching at all. They might have like taught their brother or sisters how to read or something, but they don't really have any kind of formal education. And they were told when they kind of agreed and signed up, is like, basically you call and tell us when you're available and we have a spot for you.
Yeah.
And that's just in Sioux Falls.
Yes.
So, and that's in a big city. Now, if you extrapolate that out to the whole state, it's a little bit harder for a school in, pick a place, South Dakota, to have that kind of flexibility, because they don't have a whole people sitting around saying, oh, I think I could sit in and babysit the math class, or something like that. What are schools doing?
Yeah, well, there's a need for substitute teachers, more than there ever has been. So schools are paying more to substitute teachers in order to incentivize it to get more people interested in that field. I can't remember the exact number that Sioux Falls Public Schools just increased their sub pay. I'm recalling like $150 or $200 a day, where just 20 years ago you'd be making like 75 or maybe $100 per day. So
Okay.
they are paying more because they need more people.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Let's talk about some of the complexities. All of you other panelists, please be noting your questions. Let's talk about some of the underlying complexities that maybe we don't see that impact teacher recruitment and retention.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the complexities that I'm paying close attention to is how are youngsters becoming interested in becoming a teacher? So, 10 or 20 years ago, what would happen most frequently in the Midwest was you'd have a youngster and their parent would say, you know what, you would be a very good teacher. And I'll bet you there's some people on this call that maybe had a parent or maybe had a beloved teacher that looked at them and said, you would be a good teacher. And what we know is words matter, especially words from people that we love and trust or respect. Those matter. And just those few conversations can get people thinking like, you know what, maybe I could be a good teacher. Maybe I could have an impact. Maybe I do have these skills to be able to serve this next generation of teachers. So put a pin in that. What is happening right now is parents are no longer, openly encouraging their children to become teachers. In fact, teachers or parents who are educators are reporting that they are discouraging their children from becoming teachers. Now, whoa, that's not something that's fun to talk about, but that's what's happening right now. In fact, I just talked to a superintendent of a very large district in South Dakota in the last couple months who said, I got to be honest, I actually told my kid not to be a teacher. Now, okay, so when that number one pathway of recruiting people into education is not there like it was. Now, I know I'm painting with a broad brush. I'm not saying everybody always, but I am saying, like that's a trend that's happening. Mm-hmm. When that goes away, we have to look at different ways to get youngsters interested in becoming a teacher. And that's kind of where I want this conversation to go, if you'll let me, Lawrence, because
sure,
I'm excited about some of the stuff that we're thinking about doing and we're working on right now.
Oh, that'll be a wonderful segue. But before we get too far though, let's come back to that. Put a pin in that, come back to it. And we have a couple of questions in the chat. Colby, you want to read those for us? Got to give him something to do. Otherwise, his union will be mad.
Sure, I'm happy to help out. So the first question we have, how does the teacher shortage relate to the student population? And have you seen the public school student population decline in the last 3 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Families are choosing to have fewer students. So what we are fewer children. And so the family unit is, it doesn't have 3 kids in a family anymore. So there are fewer students, but the last I saw, the population of students is slowly increasing in South Dakota. So it's not like there's some massive cliff. In higher education, we're preparing for the year 2025, where they're talking about an enrollment cliff, where nationwide, so I'm not talking about South Dakota, I'm talking about the big as a nation, there will be fewer high school graduates going to college. So, people are kind of white knuckling it, getting ready for the enrollment cliff that will happen in about 3 years. So, back to the question, how does it relate to student population? It doesn't follow population trends as much as it follows the demands of a teacher are increasing, with more kids coming to school hungry, more loss of the family unit, which more trauma is leading to the teacher shortage more than population. And then, have you seen the public school student population decline in the last 3 years? Yeah, not excessively, slow down, but not decline.
Mhm. And what was the second question on? Oh, actually, Dwayne LaFave says, as a retired public educator, he's observed the legislature gives lip service to education for about 45 years, and they're unwilling to fund education, and he's found that's disappointing. And now we're back to teacher pay, and we talked a little. I think you have a few things to say about how teacher pay is impacting the student teacher recruitment and retention.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Dwayne. What happened was South Dakota started getting some bad press maybe 7-8 years ago about being 50th in the nation for teacher pay. So they created a blue ribbon task force that you may remember about. And the big result of that came with the 1 cent sales tax to increase teacher pay. And it actually worked. So teacher pay went up to we were now 46th or 47th in the United States in teacher pay. Well, since then, we haven't been funding public education at the rate that other states have, because, when other states found out they were 49th or 50th, they started making changes too. Nobody wants to be the last. Well, what happened in the last 6 months is now South Dakota is back to 50th out of 50 states on average teacher pay.
Mm-hmm. I think, did that answer your question, Dwayne? He's stuck. Well, we're going to assume that it did because he didn't say any different. Now back to the thing you were talking about before we so rudely interrupted you.
Oh, no, I love questions. Keep them coming. You can even unmute and ask me if you prefer. I'm here to just have a conversation, like you said. So right now, my belief about education is it is the best time in the history of the world to be in education, because we know more today about what works than we've ever known in the past. So, one of the keys is to, set a positive outlook for education, because we know the most about instructional strategies. We know how important it is to meet student need, to get those basic needs met so they can learn, how to level the playing field for the haves and the have-nots. Now we just need to get to work and make some changes, get after it. And, in my sphere, of influence, it's not that big, but what I want to do is I want to figure out how to help address the teacher shortage in South Dakota. So I was like, all right, let's go. What are other states doing? What are other states doing that we could possibly do in South Dakota? And as I was looking at other states, one of the initiatives that is sweeping the nation right now is called Teacher Apprenticeship Pathways. So think of ourselves, we're pretty familiar with an electrician who is an apprentice. right? Like they have on the job training, and they are learning skills and learning best practices at the same time. So they have that interchange of like, okay, I'm learning how to do this and I'm actually doing it at the same time. And what other states started doing is they started looking at the job of a paraprofessional. Now, a paraprofessional is also called a teacher's aide, a teacher's assistant, an educational aide, or a paraprofessional. Those terms are synonymous with each other. And states started getting serious about looking at the teacher shortage as a workforce issue. So what they did is they looked at paraprofessionals in the state and they said, you know what, let's figure out how we can upskill that group of people who want to get their teacher's degree and become a teacher in their school. So practically speaking, what that could look like is a paraprofessional in White River who never got her teaching degree, but her principal always says, oh, I wish you could get your teaching degree because I would hire you in a second to teach in my district. Well, somebody like that is a perfect candidate for a teacher apprenticeship pathway in the state of South Dakota, where we can upskill them, help them earn their bachelor's degree, a full 120 credit degree, and be hired in their district or somewhere in South Dakota. So when I learned about that concept, I was very interested to learn more. So I started getting connected with people in Tennessee, with people in Wyoming, with people in Iowa, with people in North Dakota. And I started grabbing little bits about what they were doing in their state. And right now we're working on that. So in about a month, we hope to, make an announcement that we are creating a teacher apprenticeship pathway in the state. So I can answer as many questions that you have about that, where we're at, but I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to help dozens of people throughout the state each year earn their teaching degree without lowering the standards like we talked about in Florida or Arizona.
Well, okay, so it's interesting because that was going to be my next question is how does that impact the quality of a teacher? Because one would first think that, well, if that is a good way to go, then, why isn't that like the standard way? And then you have on that same, to me, a very similar pathway. If you have a person who is, let's say, using math every day,
yes,
and they solve lots of problems with math, especially things like, fractions and conversions and stuff like that. That's what they do. They do that second nature. It would seem if you could teach a person like that how to teach, because some people know how to do it, but they can't really teach it because various things, patience or just an approach of understanding how other people got it, because they maybe they learned it just by the old rulers on the knuckles thing. You make enough mistakes and you finally run out of wrong ways to do it. But they may have another way. Maybe you have a better way to help them to teach. How do those different systems compare?
Oh, what we're talking about is a systemic change of teacher preparation. Okay. So, the traditional pathway is, a youngster decides, I want to be a teacher, and they'll come to a university for 4 years, and it will culminate with a student teaching experience for between 10 weeks and up to a full year, if you have a full year residency student teaching plan, and then you apply for teaching jobs and you get into the field. Okay. So that is traditional teacher preparation in South Dakota and most of the United States. So what other states have beat us to, which drives me crazy, but what they've beat us to is they have figured out how important the experiential learning is to becoming a good teacher. So for example, if you look at this new, like a teacher apprenticeship pathway, you have somebody that's working with students 8 hours a day, and then they're able to utilize technology in the evenings and the weekends to do their coursework, and they're making connections right away with the work that they're doing with kids 8 hours a day. So put yourselves right now, I want to challenge everybody, put yourselves into the shoes of a principal. And if you are a school principal and you have somebody that's been working with kids for 8 hours a day for 4 years, and they're taking their, online classes at Dakota State, which we're the only university to offer a fully online program, would you rather hire that teacher, or would you rather have somebody that was in a university setting for 3 years and then 1 semester or 1 year of student teaching? So now people are like, whoa.
Yes. Yeah. I think we lost the sound.
Way to this model could be a superior way to training teachers. And that's what other states are creating, like a teacher apprenticeship pathway, but thinking about things a lot different than normal teacher preparation.
Mm-hmm. Are school districts aware of this, and is this change something that has been discussed and let's say ruminated through not just the school systems, but their constituent communities?
So right now there are 0 teacher apprenticeship pathways in the state of South Dakota. So right now it's something that doesn't exist. 22 states have a teacher apprenticeship pathway. I'm working on a plan to make South Dakota state number 23 starting in the fall 2023. Okay. I would say we're 90% ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm understanding, and I maybe just took for granted that you would be ready to teach it, and maybe even have people who are standing in line ready to go with a thing. I'm concerned a little bit about, in the state of affairs in the state, people don't really like change much, or they have a hard time with it. And so now it just seems like, well, where's the sell job to, for the cave people, Citizens Against Virtually Everything? Where are they, where is anybody doing the sell job on them? Or is it going to be one of those things like the new math? Here's a different way to teach that's actually a better way to teach math for people who actually have to do it in their real life as a matter of survival. But then you have people, I didn't learn it that way. I learned to count on my fingers. Like, how come we're not doing that? And I can't help my kid with his homework in the 3rd grade because you're teaching him in a different way than I learned in the 5th grade. I'm just wondering how do you sell communities or get communities ready for these kinds of changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Systemic change is hard, right? And what we're committed to is we want to create success stories 1 person at a time. And we understand that South Dakota is a very practical state, right? Like I grew up in Northwest Iowa. It's a very practical group of human beings. And if we can, get some success stories of people that are more aware of like a teacher apprenticeship pathway, and we can market that and explain it to principals and superintendents. We think we're just focused on making sure that we are setting this up for people to succeed. So one of the things, I said we're only 90% ready. Well, we decided to make a strategic decision at Dakota State University to change our online courses from 16-week increments, like a full semester, down to 8-week increments. So it's the same amount of content, but it's squeezed into 8 weeks rather than 16. Because like I said before, we know more today about education and what works than we ever have. And what we know about adult learners is they need lots of flexibility. So let's go back to that paraprofessional in White River. Let's say that it's a mom of a couple kids making $15 an hour, and she's looking at registering for classes in the fall semester, and she's thinking, you know what, like for the first 8 weeks of the semester, I'm pretty available, but the second 8 weeks, I'm hosting Thanksgiving at my house, and my son's starting basketball, and I can't take as many classes in those 8 weeks as I can in the first 8 weeks. We believe that redeveloping 51 classes in our program and converting them all to 8-week sections is going to provide some of the flexibility that's needed for the adult learners that we are going to go after. So we at Dakota State, we know who we are and where we're going, and we're making major changes like that to serve the people that we want to upskill in the state and, get more teachers in this pipeline.
Well, that brings us to how is your recruitment actually changing, or your tactics for the recruitment changing, and what are some things you're doing for retention? What's your solutions you're working on other than the one you mentioned?
Yeah, one thing that I want to highlight is something called Educators Rising. Okay, so Educators Rising, what I've learned a lot about it, and I'm a huge fan of it. I would go as far to say that I believe Educators Rising is the best chance that our state has at getting more youngsters interested in becoming teachers. So what I could use your help with is making sure that your home school district has a chapter of Educators Rising, because what they do is they're a statewide organization made up of chapters in each school districts. Some have it, some don't. I'm going to guess 50 schools have a chapter of Educators Rising, and they get these youngsters together once a month, and they do educator competitions, or they bring them to one of the universities throughout the state once a month to go and learn from their professors, learn more about the teaching professions, build relationships, see what each different teacher preparation program has to offer. And I just came from their statewide conference on Monday and Tuesday in Spearfish, South Dakota, where over 100 students came to this event, and we had speakers and we had breakout sessions with hands-on activities, and it's well organized, it's well run, and their next phase for Educators Rising is going to be fundraising to keep growing this organization. So remember when I talked about we're losing parents and educators who are encouraging kids to become teachers? Well, Educators Rising is looking to capture those students and get them interested and help them stay interested in becoming a pre-service teacher.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that reminds me of, that what you're just explaining, is when I've lived in other countries, one of the things that they do for I don't think it's just because of student shortage, but it was part of their way to educate students, is if you're in the second grade, then you go to the third grade, you're then asked to teach the second graders, as you go through school. Part of what you do is teach the class just before you, that's just under you. And so you're actually training all the kids are being trained to be teachers, but I don't know that they're doing it for that reason. The reason that they're doing it is because there's nothing like knowing a subject and having to teach it. And so they are looking at that as a way to really get students to know the thing, because if part of your education in the third grade is to teach the second grader, the second grader is like have eyeballs with the third grader. You know, they're closer in age, and there's a different way that you communicate. And it's amazing to watch these little kids teaching the little kids, just like they teach them other things, you know, that we probably prefer they didn't teach them, but they, you know, they're always teaching each other, you know. So, and as well as the kid who is at the top of the class is expected to help the kid who is at the bottom of the class struggling with that same subject. That's just part of what you do if you're, you know, as part of your education. It's not just you against all the other students, it's you helping everybody to rise. What does a model like that, how does a model like that sound in the context of what you have to do?
Well, one thing that I'm going to keep going back, we know more about education than we've ever known. And we know that it's a lot of people thrive in learning in a community, right? We learned that from the pandemic, where we had a lot of kids that struggled, and it was a genuine hard time for lots of people. But like, let's take some stuff we learned from that and learning in a community. What you described is fantastic. Let me double down on that. What if we started looking at teaching in that same way, where rather than having one teacher in a class of 25 kids, what if we like started training specialists, like we gave paraprofessionals, help them become a specialist in teaching reading. Now, okay, so now that paraprofessional can help with the reading instruction, you know, and now you're teaching in smaller groups, and now you have the special education teacher rather than pulling kids out and plopping them in special ed. What if that teacher goes in and now we have like a team of 3? Now we have 3 adults that know the names of all the kids in your class. So that churn that's going to always happen in education, where if one teacher leaves, now nobody knows that kid's name, we erase that, right? So I am hopeful that those types of models of redesigning teacher work, like teacher teams, like almost think of it like a medical, like we go to the hospital, somebody draws our blood because they're a specialist in drawing our blood. Somebody takes on our story and captures it, puts it in there, you know, and then you have the doctor that looks at all the information and, you know, can make some executive decisions for us. I predict that that's where education is going in the future, and which makes me very hopeful. Hopefully people can tell I'm, you know, I'm hopeful and optimistic about the future of education.
Well, I want to open it up again to our esteemed panel, and look like Carol is chomping at the bit. She's got a question. Go ahead, Carolyn.
So we've talked a lot about the recruitment of teachers in South Dakota, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are and what, if anything, the state has going on for the retention of those teachers. Because in my family alone, my daughter did she did substitute teaching for a year, and she fell in love with it, and she decided she wanted to be a math teacher. So she's currently in school to become a middle school math teacher, but she has no intentions of staying in South Dakota. Why? Because she can go not very far away and get paid a lot more money. And then I have a sister-in-law who went to SDSU, got an education, is an educator, but the substitute teachers were making more money than she was. So she quit and she substitute teaches, you know? And I see a question in the chat too that kind of talks about this. I have another sister-in-law who is currently teaching, but the day-to-day struggles, and she's got 5th graders, of the kids threatening each other and the kids acting out and the aggression and the misbehaving, that these teachers are now required to be counselors on top of trying to teach a lesson. She's not going back at the end of the year because she can't, there's nobody to support the teachers in that role, So what's the state? You talked a lot about, recruiting teachers, but what are we going to do to keep the teachers? And I know it always boils like money is the huge thing, but there's got to be other things. Like, what can we do as a state to help these teachers dealing with the kids that aren't getting the support from home and that have the mental health issues and the behavior issues and the fact that the substitutes are ending up with bigger paychecks than the teachers, and the substitutes are a lot of times glorified babysitters. They don't have to teach lessons, they don't have to, they just go there to make sure that nobody gets hurt and everybody goes home at the end of the day, and they're making more money. So right away, that's 3 people in my family that we're losing as teachers. So what do we do about that? And it can't be just my family, so there's got to be a lot of people in the same situations. How do we retain them? That's my big question. How do we get them here?
Great question, Carolyn. Thanks for bringing it up. Okay. If you have a complex questions in what you shared with that have equally complex answers to them, right? So one of the things that I know that we're working on as a state is there is a regional educational laboratory. It's called a REL. And what happens is they are funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and they we are a part in South Dakota, we're a part of REL Central. REL Central, okay? So it's made up of 6 states. South Dakota is one of them. And the REL reached out to me this fall, and they said, we hear you're making changes. How can we help? And I'm like, is this for real? Like, I didn't know that there were supports out there. So I've been working with them, meeting with them almost weekly. It's a team of 9 people. And they just made it formal in the last week that they want to make their main project in South Dakota on recruiting and retaining teachers. And the reason I bring that up is they know what other states are doing, and they can help us figure out what's working in other states to address some of those issues. So when I talk specifically about recruitment or retention, which is the essence of your questions, we know that people oftentimes leave jobs because of bad culture or bad leadership. Okay. And that's not something we like to talk about very much. But, the culture can be bad when a substitute teacher is getting paid more than you. Isn't that crazy? We need to do something about that, right? And that requires more money and more awareness and more of a grassroots effort amongst our constituents of South Dakota to get in front of our legislators and say, listen, we need to fund public education in this state, and we need to be serious about that. And if everybody on this call sent an email or made a call, that would be moving us in the right direction, right? We need to get the attention of the legislator because they want to know what we're interested in as constituents, right? They would welcome that feedback. So other things that I'm a part of a group called School Administrators of South Dakota. It's SASD. And I'm actually on our executive board. So it's the main organization that unites the principals and superintendents in the state. And what they do is they provide professional development for principals and superintendents to talk to your legislators. We give them phone numbers, we give them contact, we give them talking points about how to be advocates for their schools in their district. So I know that is happening right now because I'm a part of it. So it's something that is on people's radars, and we're working on it.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone else have questions, comments?
Lawrence, if I
Yes.
could, I'd like to bring up a question that was just put in the chat. I think it's a
Sure.
great question.
Sure.
So would you address the politicization of of
That
teaching?
thing.
Yeah, that thing. Could teachers be leaving because they no longer feel they are teaching the basics of learning, but are required to also undertake social justice issues, sex education, and others?
Yeah, I would say that this is one of the top 5 issues that is plaguing recruitment and retention. So let me start with recruitment. Think of that youngster that's thinking about becoming a teacher, and then all of a sudden they are, they're hearing media like, you have to teach this, or you can't teach this, or the politics gets into that. If they're on the fence of becoming a teacher or not, my heart drops when I think about that person that's on the fence and they're like, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm not going to get into education. So I mean, I have fears. Now that's really hard to measure quantitatively, but but we all kind of know that could be tipping people in the negative direction of not becoming a teacher. With the recruitment of teachers, how that comes out with people, their speech of teachers, they're like, you know what? I became a teacher to teach the kids, but all the other stuff that goes along with this, what they're really saying is the essence of the question that was asked there is the politicization of stuff is not helping teachers want to stay in education.
Any more, Colby?
Well, there was one earlier, and I think it's sort of been addressed, but the question was, based on how you describe the modern day student, hungry, family issues, et cetera, do you see future teacher education, including more mental health and counseling in their academic courses? And I would just offer, so for the last several years, there's something known as social emotional learning, or SEL is the umbrella sort of acronym for it, that has been a big part of the teacher training that schools in large part have been undertaking for teachers. And then I'm sure Dr. DeYoung can add to that, but.
Yeah, so what happens through all teacher preparation programs, they have to go through an accreditation process. Okay, so everybody has to be accredited, and part of the accreditation process is we have to provide evidence that we are listening to our external stakeholders and internal stakeholders about what's going on. And then we have to make meaningful changes based on what we're learning. Okay. So like student needs is the number one thing that teacher preparation programs are hearing, is how to meet the needs of students is becoming more and more of a challenge. And, kids are coming to school hungrier and hungrier, right? And we know now, we have research studies to back it up, that if a kid is coming to school with lots of trauma the night before, or they didn't get breakfast, or maybe not a evening meal, it's hard for them to learn when they come into school. So, there's a lot of good success stories about how to, get breakfast, make that available for all students when they get to school. There's, more. The hottest training that's happening across schools is trauma-informed training. Like, what do you actually do with a child that comes to school that they saw trauma the night before, or they're struggling with it? And it's called ACEs training, and it's good stuff. So I would say that that's on the radar of all that's happening. People are because when most teachers were trained in a teacher preparation program in the past, they didn't learn how to deal with students with trauma, right? Like, we understand that. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're training these new students, and we're providing professional development for our current teachers.
Well, this is a good segue, because we're really running down our clock much faster than I thought we would. Underneath all of this, we have a nation to build. We have a nation, if we're going to keep it, to be competitive and relevant to change. when you talk about, giving the student what they need, one of the things that has occurred to me is that often we're training kids for how we live 20 years ago or more, as opposed to what are the skills they need going ahead, not knowing what industry and those kind of things are going to be extant or not. What are the basic things that kids will need to learn how to do that's going to be relevant no matter how the world changes? And are they getting that? And what impact does that have on building and retaining a nation?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I would go as far to say on the record that I believe teachers are nation builders. Yeah, I think about that a lot. Like, this is such important work to, to teach these this generation of students how to be a productive member of society growing up, and learning what skills and interests and passions they have, and giving them opportunities to explore those passions. So, lots of different universities have different initiatives. One that we have at Dakota State University is called the Governor's Cyber Academy, where now for the first time ever, students can take up to 21 college credits while in high school if they're interested in computer science and they're interested in some sort of job with cyber. We can now provide that. We can bring that to the high schools, which is pretty awesome. I mean, things like that, opportunities like that haven't happened in the past before, because, even 6 months ago, before I came to Dakota State, I would have said, yeah, you could get a job in cyber. But what I've learned from like our President Griffiths and Provost Hoy and my friends in the cyber world is every industry has cyber needs. So let me say that again. Every industry has cyber needs moving forward. So that's one thing that we're doing. And I predict that if you haven't heard about the Governor's Cyber Academy yet, you'll hear more about it in the next 3 years, because it's coming to a high school near you in South Dakota.
Well, that brings one more thing. I hope we have time for this. One of the things that has been available even when I was in school, but nobody talked about, was the ability for young people to CLEP out of college classes and get ahead and actually take courses and have almost half of their college done by the time they go to college. And if you add that on top of what you're talking about now, that could do a lot toward, one, just getting more people with a college education, and two, having more teachers who have degrees in education. I'm just wondering, is that a thing that you guys could include in your tactics going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So like there are districts in South Dakota right now, and I've been on dissertation committees, which are basically a fancy way of saying like a district level research project, where a district was measuring the dual credit opportunities in their district and how that transferred to college. And they found that the students that if they did well in like a dual credit in math in high school, that actually correlated to them doing well in college. And it kept them more engaged as a high school senior. And there are instances where students are graduating with their AA degree a day before they graduate from high school. And then there's also AP courses. And, so there's high school dual credit and AP. And it's really, I think it's doing a good job in the state of engaging our juniors and seniors in high school and really helping them explore their passions and their interests before they get to college and they, it's more expensive. And, so we're learning how to help people earlier.
Thank you. We have run out of time, and it's been a wonderful conversation. And I think it's one that needs to continue because we didn't cover even half of the things that we could have and should have. So I want to thank you again for everyone who showed up and were part of the conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. DeYoung, for bringing that information to us. And hopefully we will now go ahead and use it, because if we don't use it, we lose it.
Yes.
Goodbye. We'll see you guys next week. Same time, same station.
Thank you.